these people were all gung-ho. They wanted to build the kingdom of God. So he's invited them to come up and live at our house, the old green church.
So you had a big family.
Right.
In effect.
We were living in a commune.
Okay. And was polygamy still the thing at that point?
Yes.
Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, episode 62, A Mormon Fundamentalist Upbringing, with guest Mike Collier. I'm Mark Kane. I've alluded to this topic for several months now, and the time has finally come. The number of people who have had the kind of up-close and unique experiences that Mike has had are incredibly few. What's especially unique is he's able to look back on it from a perspective of a thoughtful truth seeker. He's emerged, slowly, from a high-control religious environment to eventually find us, to appreciate, among other things, the simple and scriptural account of who God is, a teaching that does not depend on inference, conjecture, creeds, or speculation. And speaking of that, during this conversation, Mike will mention the Adam-God doctrine. It's likely to be new to many of you, so here's enough to frame it up so you won't feel lost. The Adam-God doctrine was taught by Brigham Young, one of the early presidents of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often abbreviated LDS. It is still taught in some Mormon fundamentalist groups, but not believed in the LDS mainstream movement, which is much larger. Brigham Young said he was taught by Joseph Smith, that's the original founder of the movement, that Adam is our Father and our God. If that seems odd, here's how it worked. According to this theory, Adam was once a mortal man who became resurrected and exalted. See, Adam was from another planet. Then he came here as Michael the angel. Subsequently, he was given a physical body and given a spouse. That's Eve. And then by eating the forbidden fruit, he became mortal and had kids. Thus began the entire human race. Having achieved that, Adam and Eve were exalted, returned to their heavenly thrones, and now Adam serves as the God and Heavenly Father of all humankind. I do find it paradoxical that some modern Christians can scoff at this at one moment, and then in the next, wax poetic and enrapturedly declare the eternal loving dance of the three persons of the Godhead. There you are. Oh, and after today's part 1 concludes, we'll have some thoughts from Brandon Duke about the second annual UCA conference. So buckle in. You're embarking on an intriguing and unexpected journey. Mike Collier, I appreciate that you're joining me today, and it's cool to be speaking to another person from way out west. Where you live?
I live in the Utah, Uinta Basin. It's the northeast corner. It's the one that's under Wyoming.
Okay, right.
Since there's 2 northeast corners.
You're the first person I've interviewed who has been a part of the Latter-day Saints. So I think you'll probably want to start far enough back that we get all the context we need.
Sounds good. So I come from a long line of Mormon pioneer ancestors. I have several ancestors that were living in Nauvoo. That's the city that was built under Joseph Smith's immediate supervision, and that was where he was living when he was killed in Carthage, Illinois.
Okay.
My grandma would tell me things about her grandparents and stuff when I was young, but she didn't really know a lot of stuff that I was able to find out later. But I was always curious about the past, and I've always been fascinated by family history and how much my family was actually involved in the formation and the origin of Mormonism.
Fascinating.
And I don't mean to be offensive to anybody using the term Mormonism, but that's what I always use. I was never offended by it. No one was offended by it then. And so I apologize if anyone might be offended by it, but I ask that they try to understand my perspective.
Yeah. So the current preferred term is Latter-day Saints, or
Right.
LDS, right?
Which has come about since I have left.
Okay, I see.
So in the LDS church, they have like areas. They divvy this area out in between their meeting houses. And each meeting house usually serves a broader area, and then several people from that area meet at different times on Sunday.
Hmm.
So the bishop is pretty much a pastor, but they don't call them pastors, they call them bishops.
Okay.
So my dad was the bishop's favorite, my grandma told me. He was the favorite priest, and they ordain boys to be priests, usually if they're considered faithful, when they're 16, I believe. Yeah. They go from deacon, teacher, to priest, ranging from about 12 to 16.
And is the next step up after priest the bishop?
No, it would be an elder.
Okay.
Really, the opposite the general membership can go to above elder is high priest, but just because someone's a high priest doesn't mean they're above the bishop. It's kind of confusing.
It's levels of rank or position that you achieve over time.
Right.
Okay.
But in order to be a bishop, you'd have to be a high priest, unless you're a descendant of Aaron.
Aaron,
the brother of Moses.
how do you demonstrate that you're a descendant of Aaron?
Well, in the LDS church, they have a person called a patriarch. So above a ward is a stake. Stakes compose several wards. In the stake, there's a stake president, and he oversees the several wards where the bishops oversee the individual ward.
Okay.
Just below the stake presidency is the stake patriarch. And the stake patriarch gives blessings called the patriarchal blessing. And in that blessing, it's supposed to be revealed their lineage. So.
Okay, so it's not a DNA test.
No, it's not a DNA test. It's supposed to be revealed by the Spirit.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so he was the bishop's favorite priest. And he got married young. He didn't go on a mission. Yeah, well, it was either get married or go on a mission, because these are considered your life duties. He was 18. My mom was 18. So I was his third child. And just before I was born in 1971. In 1970, in August, he was introduced to some fundamentalist Mormons. It was at work. Basically, he worked for the church, and he had a bunch of prints of Brigham Young, the second president of the church, after Joseph Smith. And this man told him, hey, don't throw those away. He was about to throw them away because they were just duplicates, you know? And he said, well, I got lots of friends that would like those, so don't throw them away. So this introduced him to fundamentalism, and he found out that Brigham Young taught the Adam God doctrine, that Adam was God. And this is going to come up later on in our conversation, I'm sure.
At the time, he was in what would have been the mainstream.
Right.
All right.
So anyway, he decided that the LDS church had gone astray because he found discrepancies in what church leaders had taught, 100 plus years ago, and what they were teaching currently. It's interesting. Before this, he wanted to write novels. When he was a kid, he wrote several hundred pages, a story about a guy and his dog. Funny thing. But anyway, so when he got married, though, before he joined the fundamentalism, he wanted to write a novel about Joseph Smith. And so he went up to the church historian this would have been 1969 or something like that. Anyway, he was refused the information that he wanted from the church historical department. So when he became a fundamentalist, there was nothing stopping him, right? No authority figure above him saying, now we have enough written on this or that subject. So he just kind of decided to go ahead as he felt inspired to do so. And so he started writing on all kinds of things. And I think he felt that was his calling in life,
Oh, that's good.
to write the true doctrine.
Right. To get it right.
Yes. He had some serious issues with the modern day conventional LDS doctrine.
Yeah.
And I mean modern day back then in 1970.
Okay.
In his view, and as well as in mine right now, the LDS church has veered further and further from their roots. as they go. It appears like that is what they do.
He's using Joseph Smith kind of as the baseline.
Right. So, I mean, Joseph Smith is seen as a very significant prophet.
Okay.
The greatest prophet ever to walk the earth, save Jesus only.
So he's kind of the Mormon Muhammad.
Yeah, you could say that. I didn't make any parallels until more recently, but yeah. So he left and he devoted his life to writing and therefore theology and piecing all the puzzle pieces together of Mormon theology, Mormon doctrine, and making them work. He has devoted his entire life to this, and he still is devoted to it. I mean, he's probably sitting at his desk right now, working on either a paper that he never finished that he started 20 years ago, or trying to finish something else.
And this is all about the historical teachings of the church.
Right. He has the underlying assumption that Joseph Smith restored original Christian truth, original Christian doctrine. You know, he brought back the knowledge and the authority of ancient Christianity.
All right. So all of this was taking place when you were young. Your father's switch to the more fundamentalist side, diving in, writing, and becoming really heavily involved with the teachings of the church.
Yes. Yeah, I was very young because, I mean, he only was introduced into it like about 5 or 6 months before I was born.
Okay.
So when I was old enough to be able to perceive what he was spending his time on, I remember going with him places, and he would visit actually like the church historical department, and he would get in conversations with historians, and he really wanted to like push his understanding of church history and Joseph Smith's original teachings in the group that was talking about these things, the more intellectual strain of Mormonism.
So he would hang around the libraries and...
Right. I remember being at University of Utah library. I remember sitting in the car for hours and hours. I remember like me and my older brother, my older sister, just waiting and waiting and waiting for Dad to finish having his conversations.
Oh, man. What was kind of the next transition? What happened?
Well, so I kind of wanted to mend back the thought about my grandma and how she felt about my dad.
Okay.
I guess it was this idea that since he was so promising of a, young Latter-day Saint, and she had such high hopes for him that when he fell away, which was only, he was born in 1948. So he was not very old. He was like 22 or something like that. When he fell away from the mainstream LDS church, my grandmother told me that she cried for 2 years, and I gather that meant that she just had this ongoing episodes of weeping and pain for 2 years until she finally was able to accept that he had done that.
Now, going away from the mainstream, it's not like he left Mormonism exactly. He felt that it needed to be more pure. Why wasn't that perceived as he's gone in a weird direction, but at least he's still following Joseph Smith? It wasn't seen that way?
There's kind of a strange irony. You would think that. You would think, yeah, at least he believes in Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon and the Restoration. But honestly, there's a strong stigma against anyone who leaves the mainstream church and goes to a fundamentalist group or sect. They're warned. They're warned that the fundamentalists are basically deceptive, wolves in sheep's clothing, and this sort of thing. So
is it worse than leaving the church entirely?
If you became like a Protestant or something like that, yeah, if he had done that, hey, I got the truth, and he was kind of a Bible thumper, I mean, that wouldn't have been accepted either. Okay. Although if someone came up to the LDS church and they were potential converts from either, mainstream Christianity or fundamentalism, the fundamentalist person would be looked at with more suspicion.
Well, I can I can see why that might be, because even in the mainstream Christianity, if somebody says, oh, I still believe in the Bible, but I realize that the Trinity wasn't taught in the Bible, those people, they'll get the sign of the cross sometime, like, get away from me, you might be possessed or something. It's
Yeah.
really, it's almost like you'd be better off going atheism.
Right.
It's I don't know, it's a unique situation where that particular move is seen with much more repulsion by those in the movement.
Yeah, that if someone, if they just became worldly or something and fell away, yeah, they'd be a lot easier to be looked at than someone who is, from the dark side, right?
That's fascinating. Okay, all right.
Okay. My father was the one who had the biggest impact on my thinking, my mind, religiously and theologically speaking.
Okay.
My parents did divorce when I was around 6 months old, or at least separated, and I ended up going to live with his parents. But anyway, so they raised me in the church for those several years, and they wanted my dad to give them custody. They said, if we're going to raise them and take care of them, then we want complete legal custody, and we want to be able to raise them, religiously speaking, the way we want to raise them.
Right. And that would have been the mainstream LDS
That's right.
movement.
It would have been mainstream.
Yeah.
So my dad immediately came and got us, and that was that. And so we were raised after that point. I'm pretty sure I was about 5, by his thinking and way.
Okay.
So he also started to live polygamy sometime around there.
Was that already part of the fundamentalist view when he joined it, or had that been developing at the time?
No, Mormon fundamentalism goes back to the early 1900s. Wilford Woodruff had signed a manifesto in 1890 saying that they would basically give up plural marriage. Well, they didn't. I already know they didn't really give it up. They said they gave it up. But in 1905, Joseph F. Smith, he was 2 presidents after Wilford Woodruff, and he signed the second manifesto. But the church got in a lot of problems because they said they had given up plural marriage in 1890 and didn't actually totally give it up. And there's reasons to believe that they didn't give it up in 1905 either. But it was a lot stricter and a lot more hidden.
So the mainstream, at that time, even the mainstream LDS had some polygamy.
So Joseph Smith had practiced polygamy, and it was in secret. And most members didn't know at all. Some might have heard whispers or rumors about it, but it was not publicly talked about at all until 1852 in a general conference of the LDS Church, when under Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12, it was announced that it was a doctrine, it had been revealed through Joseph Smith, and it was to be practiced.
And so there it became mainstream at that point.
Well, the belief in it became mainstream. A lot of people had a hard time with it.
Okay.
Only about 2% of the church ever practiced it. So, the vast majority didn't, but they basically followed a habit of promoting those who were faithful in the practice of polygamy to higher positions in the LDS church. So that within 20 years or so after that announcement, if you were an authority in the church, you also practiced plural marriage.
Okay.
Because you didn't get chosen for those positions unless you did.
Okay.
So it goes Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, and Wilford Woodruff. And all these men were contemporary with Joseph Smith. They were all about the same age. So Joseph Smith was only 38 when he died. He was born in 1805. The church was organized in 1830. So he was quite young.
Yeah.
So when he died, he was still young. But these men who were his, close group, they went on basically to become the succeeding leaders, presidents of the LDS Church.
Okay.
And they all had accepted polygamy in secret with him when he was practicing it before he died. But anyway, so for Wilford Woodruff to sign the manifesto in 1890 saying they would give up plural marriage was a big deal. And so this is what kind of started to create the fundamentalist group. It didn't come about for a while because they were still practicing polygamy in secret. And Wilford Woodruff would tell people secretly that, hey, don't worry, things are okay, Well, 2 presidents later, Joseph F. Smith, who signed the second manifesto, pretty much after that, it was practiced with the idea that if you were caught, you assume all responsibility and you don't point to the church or to the leaders of the church.
Okay, so the mainstream was moving slowly away from it, even though it was being practiced in private, finally to the point where they made it official that we're not going to back you in your polygamy. You're on your own.
Right.
Okay.
But then they would tell these people that if they were caught, don't worry, they'll still have all their sealing blessings in the celestial kingdom and whatnot, So it basically, the mystery surrounding all this is the air around the beginnings of the Mormon fundamentalist movement, basically. And you can kind of see how that would begin to pan out.
Right, because the church was changing their stance on polygamy, and there was a subcurrent that says, what are they doing? This is all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the interesting thing is that my great-grandmother married this other member. My great-grandfather, who I did know, he was born around 1899. She was born early 1900s. So think about this. During that time period of transition, his own father-in-law is a polygamist, has 2 wives. One wife living across the Idaho border and one wife living right across the Utah border. Okay.
Wow.
And nobody knew. And it's like, I'm like digging up the history. Why? This is weird. I get it now, because after the manifesto, you got to try to, don't flaunt it, right?
Right. It's got to be less obvious.
And don't talk about it. And so because of that, the next generation, a lot of them grew up, maybe kind of knowing, but it was just that thing that you don't talk about. My great-grandfather was born in 1899, but he had told my dad in the 1970s, he told him that Joseph Smith had never practiced polygamy. My dad had insisted that he had, and they had a bet, and my dad always said he never got paid. But this is a strange irony. My great-grandfather was so close. Like I said, the previous generation practiced polygamy. His own father-in-law was one of the 2%, okay? But yet he did not even know. This is how well it was not talked about. He didn't even know that Joseph Smith had practiced polygamy. He thought that Brigham Young was the first one to introduce polygamy.
Wow. Okay, I'm getting a picture now of a lot of secrecy, polygamy still happening, and then the fundamentalist group emerges from that, or various ones.
Well, so there was several schisms, little teeny groups, but there was only one main group in the early, probably from 1915 to 1930. The Loren Willie group. Loren Willie had been John Taylor's bodyguard, and he claimed to have seen and been introduced to Joseph Smith, who had been resurrected supposedly by John Taylor in 1886. And so he was there, and he was aware that Joseph Smith was appearing to John Taylor, and John Taylor had commissioned him and told him, you are to never stop practicing plural marriage. Make sure that there's never a year that goes by when children aren't born under plural marriage.
Wow.
That's how staunch it was.
As a ballpark, how many mainstream versus the small other group, the fundamentalists? Was it like 1% of them, 0.5%? Was
you mean right now or back then?
Back then. Like how big was that at the time?
So I think Mormonism actually hit 1 million around the 1960s or 70s.
Okay.
Now they boast of about 15 million. But by the late 1800s, they were approaching around 100,000. So Mormonism total was probably around 200 or 300, maybe 400,000 or something like that in the 1920s. And the fundamentalists were just a little, not much.
Like just a few hundred maybe?
Yeah. By the 1950s, there was a few hundred.
Okay.
So my dad got involved in a little bit different faction, though. Not the branch that believed in the Loren Willie story, but the one that believed in the LeBaron story. And they claimed that they had a personal succession going back to Joseph Smith.
Hmm.
And they all have a different take on Joseph Smith's doctrine too, okay?
Okay.
So this is why my dad wants to sort this out, right? And this is why that's been his mission to sort it out.
So he's like a Joseph Smith restorationist.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, and it makes sense, you know, if God revealed this through Joseph Smith and this is the truth of God, well, then God doesn't change.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't think my father went far enough. I don't think he examined the LDS claims of authority and doctrine and compared that with and dug deeply into original Christian doctrine.
Mm.
He just assumed that Joseph Smith had it right and he just ran with it.
Mm.
And I just felt like maybe we should test that. Maybe we should push back a little further and make sure that we have the continuity that we've thought.
But you weren't thinking this yet.
No. Yeah, we're still.
Yeah. In the story now, that's what your dad has embarked on. You're back with him. He's doing all this work, and you're growing up in his house. I guess at that time when he brought you back, he was still single?
He was married to another woman.
Okay.
But ironically, my mother came back to him. He had two other wives. I don't know if they were both with him at the time. So, but he might have only had two at one time.
So okay. I'm still trying to picture now. You growing up, you have multiple moms. I don't know how you referred to the others in the house.
So my dad's household wasn't exactly the typical polygamous household. The other wife that he had at the time he remarried my mom, she had her own house. She had her own career. She supported herself.
Oh.
So she was kind of a more independent lady.
So she wasn't around much with you.
Actually, now that you mention it, I do remember being with her for some time before my mother came back. And maybe this is one of the reasons. I've never really thought about it from this angle. You know, when you're older, you can kind of pick up on things. Probably my mother, I imagine, didn't really like another woman raising her children. Right?
Yeah, I could see that.
Even though she's never said anything to me about that. And we've never talked about it.
It probably wasn't comfortable for her.
No, she never did like polygamy, by the way. And they got in lots of arguments. I mean, it caused a lot of contention, at least as much as Leah and Rachel.
All right. Were there any other marriages after those at that point, or did he stop at the two?
There were others, but most of them were only temporary. My mom, later, when I was a teenager, she'd always tell my dad, okay, polygamy is a true principle and you have to live it, but I'm going to be around when all those wives are gone. And, well, to my dad's chagrin, that has come to pass.
Wow. How many half siblings then do you have over the course of the multiple marriages?
So my father never had any children with any of his other wives until I was already married myself. When I was about 18, he did marry these other two women that were younger. Well, one of them was in her early 30s and the other one was about my age.
Wow.
And the older one had a couple kids and the younger one had, I think, 5 or 6. But keep in mind, I was already like married and gone pretty much by the time they were finishing having their kids.
Okay.
And they were with him for 20 years. So around there, the two of them. One left earlier, but the other one followed within, 3 or 4 years. And so my mom is alone with my dad.
So it seems like there was a lot of divorce. I guess divorce was okay because otherwise he would have blown it multiple times with all these wives leaving him. But here it's like coming and going, like a revolving door in effect.
Yeah, this is a difference amongst the different LDS fundamentalist groups. Some of them would be appalled at that kind of a divorce rate, and others It's just common. Personally, I feel like I'm pretty biblically conservative when it comes to that. I've been through a divorce myself.
Hmm.
So it was a pretty hard thing for me.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So, okay.
So I'm a little more appalled at that myself, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be judgmental of my father, but basically, I think that was kind of a recklessness,
Hmm.
as much as I love him.
Okay. And then the question I asked earlier, approximately how many half siblings do you actually have? What would be your number?
My dad has about 27 children in all.
Okay.
And I don't know the exact figure. He hasn't had a child for a long time.
That is so.
Well, so I was already married, like I was saying, when he had my half siblings.
Okay.
And because of that, I mean, I have kids that are as old as a lot of them,
Yeah.
Um,
And do you even see them? Is there any opportunities where
Oh.
you?
Around then, I became estranged because by my late 20s, I was starting to entertain the idea of joining the mainstream LDS church.
Mm.
But in the last 10 years, I've gotten to know them, mostly all of them,
Oh, that's cool.
a lot better. So we're not really estranged anymore.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So in your younger age, then you were in the same mindset as your dad. That what he was talking about, you were pretty much on board. You were kind of like you were just raised in it. Would that be accurate?
So my dad had told them, he had told several of them that I understood his doctrine better than any of his children.
Wow.
So theology has been something kind of a lifelong pursuit for me.
So you think you got that from him? Like you just saw him do it and it became interesting to you?
So I remember when I was 7, hearing Bible stories, hearing the story about Joseph Smith in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I got for my birthday the children's Bible. It's actually a Protestant Bible.
I think I know the one. Yeah.
But I just remember really loving the pictures and loving the stories and just wanting to know more about God.
Okay.
That was kind of a desire that grew in me from that point on. That by the time I was 11, when I got my first set of LDS scriptures, which included the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
I told my parents that I only wanted to read the Bible.
Mm.
Maybe a little bit extreme, but
Well.
But I will say this is that before I ever read the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants or the Pearl of Great Price, from a child's perspective, I was quite familiar with, Genesis, at least Genesis and Exodus,
Okay.
I couldn't get through Leviticus very good. And then I had read the New Testament before I really had read the Book of Mormon too, when I was a little bit older. But I really got into the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors and sold into Egypt.
Mm.
And that made a big impression on me. And, another thing that made a huge impression is the Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, and it kind of relates to my story later on, when you're reading about how God gave commandments to the children of Israel and they disobeyed him, and there's just kind of this like, wow, how could they disobey him? How could they do this?
Mm.
I just remember just this longing to be unobedient Israelite. I don't know how to say I wasn't an Israelite, but we believed we were modern Israel at the time.
Yeah. So your interest followed along with you and grew as you grew. Your dad was proud of your accomplishments.
I got into about the age of 14 and 15. I started to really get into my dad's doctrine. He had written a small shelf full of pamphlets, putting forth what he thought was the true Joseph Smith doctrine, the true doctrine of original Mormonism.
Okay.
And, he attracted people to him from the LDS church. People came to him and were joining his, they would kind of come and go, but, in any case, I ended up getting into many conversations when I was that age, 14, 15, 16, with other people that were in this circle of influence. And it had a profound effect on me and my interest in theology too.
Oh, yeah.
Because I can see, well, other people have different positions. And that also expanded out into mainstream Mormonism and even into the evangelical world till I was familiar, generally speaking, with a much broader area of religion.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable for a teenager to have that much exposure.
I mean, it wasn't on a real deep level.
Okay.
I was kind of learning to be a Bible thumper.
Ah,
I mean, I don't know. What is a Bible thumper in the Protestant world? What does that mean?
well, the way I understand it is it's somebody who believes they're very correct about their interpretation of the Bible, and they have the proof texts always at the ready.
Yep, that's what it was.
Okay, there you go. So you were learning about the other groups as a defense against their teachings to prove them wrong.
Yes, and so
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I didn't have any real sincere desire, to believe in God and believe in truth, but I think there was probably a little bit of, there's a little pride element that comes with, being able to prove everybody else wrong and you right, of course,
Oh, yes.
coincidentally.
It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
All right. Now I get it. That's how your father ended up pleased because he could see your engagement with the material that he had, your engagement with others. For a religious father who loved diving in, you were kind of a model child.
I mean, I guess you could say that. My dad had challenged Walter Martin, the Walter Martin. Do you know who Walter Martin is?
Not offhand.
You'd probably recognize if I told you about his book. Walter Martin is probably the most famous for his book, but I don't know the title of it off the top of my head. I think it's called The Kingdom of the Cults, or it has to do with all these cults, all these Christian cults.
I'll have it here in a second.
Okay.
Yes, The Kingdom of the Cults.
Oh, that is it. Okay, good.
Yes, good job.
He addresses Mormonism, but guess who else is addressed in that book?
I would guess us Unitarian Christians.
Yes,
yeah.
the Unitarian. So I went from one cult to another.
Oh, yeah. As long as you're
Yeah.
still in Walter Martin's book, you're good.
Yeah. So the story is my dad had challenged Walter Martin in a debate.
Okay.
Because Walter Martin was he was probably the real first popular evangelical debater of Mormonism. Okay.
Okay.
He knew the stuff, he knew Mormon history. He knew he could point out the contradictions. He could dig up Adam God. But he did a lot on like the Mormon conception of God too. Like Mormons believe that God is a human being. And, they kind of have an easy backdoor there because they said, well, Jesus is a human being, right? Jesus is a man, right? And he's God, right? Doesn't it make sense that his father is also a man? There's kind of a logic there, right?
I guess like son, like father. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
It's kind of a set of logic I don't subscribe to anymore because I think that the Bible teaches something different.
Really?
Anyway, so my dad had challenged this guy to a debate and he had never accepted it. But when I was 11 years old, my dad had this cassette from Walter Martin.
Okay.
And I can't remember. I've listened to it on YouTube in the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. So what my dad did is he played this tape and then he would let Walter Martin say something about Mormonism. Then he'd stop it. And then he'd say, now let me show you that he's wrong, and he would show us from the Bible that Adam is God.
Wait, was he just doing this for the family or did he have a group of people there? Was he having a...
No, he wanted his sons to learn to engage. So I would say this is my first, wow, like the idea of having proof texts and look, he's saying one thing, he's quoting this, but look, we can show that that's wrong because we can quote that.
He was doing this for his family. He was doing this to help bring you up right.
Right. And actually it really it was intriguing.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I loved it.
Oh, to have a recording of that now. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah. Now, my dad had really solid ideas about authority and priesthood. So he had joined this guy that was part of the LeBaron family. And he received his priesthood, from this man. Years later, he felt like God led him to go on his own. And he believed that he eventually became the prophet, kind of the one who holds the keys on the earth,
Oh,
the one anointed and appointed, which, now I have something quite to say about that title. So this is an exclusive truth claim.
mm,
So he believed that he would start to write and, God would just move him to, write and write and write. And this was just a sign that the knowledge and the truth was coming through him and not through his forerunner.
okay.
God was inspiring him to come up with this. And there's a quote that he quoted from Joseph Smith: "The priest that is the channel through which all knowledge and doctrine and the plan of salvation and every important matter is revealed from heaven." That's a direct quote from Joseph Smith. So that basically, when he felt like he was receiving all this insight into church history and doctrine, that it was a sign that the priesthood authority was with him. And so he actually has that as a common quote on all of his pamphlets.
Hmm.
So in 1992, after I was married, I had been married for about a year, my dad had felt inspired to formally organize a church.
Hmm.
And he called it the Church of the Firstborn. In his mind, the firstborn wasn't Christ, which it is in mainstream Mormon doctrine.
Yeah.
But he quoted one passage in the Pearl of Great Price, which was seeming to say that Adam was the firstborn. And since Adam is God, this is the Church of the Firstborn. So my dad believed that there was two churches. The idea of a church is a really loaded term in Mormonism. And it took a long time for me to come away from that. But it's not just the people. It's the institutional hierarchy. It's the dispenser of salvation to the ends of the earth.
Mm.
And there's two churches, my dad said. There's the Church of the Firstborn, and there's the Church of Christ. In the Church of Christ, you receive everything that you need to receive salvation. And in the Church of the Firstborn, which is Adam, who is the Father, therefore it's the Church of the Father. So you really have the Church of the Son, the Church of the Father. In the Church of the Father, you learn everything about exaltation, how to become gods. You get your exaltation sealed upon you.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if that adds anything to our interview, but
it's okay. It's sort of like two systems.
yeah.
One about salvation and one about becoming ultimate.
It's kind of like being the greatest in the kingdom of heaven instead of being just the least. If you could use Matthew chapter 5.
Okay.
It comes from the book of Hebrews, I think chapter 12, where it says, "You are come to the Church of the Firstborn."
Hmm.
I now think, and I'm quite convinced that that is a reference to Jesus Christ, Yeshua the Messiah. So
yeah. So he started this church. You said you were 1 year married at that point?
I was 1 year married when he actually started this church. And he had people biting the bait on the hook, so to speak. He was proselyting certain families and stuff that were active LDS mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And they were interested and they were reading his pamphlets and his works. And so he announces this formal organization of this church. Okay. And so he invites them all to come. And so they all come and they all are baptized. And so there's this like a bigger group, right?
Yeah. And
we lived in this old church house, this old LDS church house that was built in the 1920s and then added on in the 1960s, I think. And it was a big building and it had been developed with multiple rooms. And so my dad, these people were all gung-ho. They wanted to build the kingdom of God. So he's invited them to come up and live at our house, at his house.
I see.
The old green church.
So you had a big family, in effect.
Right.
You had a lot of people living under your roof.
We were living in a commune.
Okay. And was polygamy still the thing at that point?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, polygamy. Several of these people had started to practice polygamy in this setting. But this situation only lasted, for the most of them, about a year.
Hmm.
And there began to be personal problems and dissensions. And there I was with such high hopes,
Yeah.
And seeing the reality of people. And now I would say in our fallen nature and selfishness and just what people can fall to at their weaker moments.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot of that.
Mm.
I remember one guy said he was really upset at somebody else in the group, and everybody had these common eating area. They had a common eating area, but each family had their own table. And he called everybody to their table, and he made his family announcement, and he says, "From now on, I want you to do to others before they do to you." Something like that.
Okay.
In addition to living in this complex situation, we were all living what we called United Order. Mormon history is called United Order. Joseph Smith claimed to have received revelations on living kind of communally, I guess, not necessarily in the same building, but economically united, having a common pot.
Okay.
And so we were doing that. That was part of the restoration, right? That was part of the original Mormonism. So we're doing that. And
Right.
I think you could probably guess that it would lead to all kinds of problems. That and living together. And
yeah. I can only imagine. Okay, we'll pick this up next time, starting with a question my eldest son wanted me to ask regarding spouse availability in a polygamous community. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then there's the fleeing the country part. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Amanda Dunn, our event coordinator, has lived in a bit of a whirlwind the last few months. She tells me there are new events on their way to the events page, but as of this recording, they aren't there yet. So consider this announcement a mystery grab bag. Visit UnitarianChristianAlliance.org/events and see what you find. I'm kind of hoping there's a beach event in, say, Hawaii. Yeah. If you Twitter, there's an official UCA account, @UnitarianChrist. If you read, there's a UCA podcast newsletter, brimming with thoughtfully arranged letters, spaces, and punctuation. If you are looking to find others and you agree with us that God is one, and that Jesus is his human son, the prophet like Moses, the promised descendant of David, and the exalted Lord and Messiah, then sign up for free at UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. Put your postal code in, and other members can reach out to you through the site. When they do that, the website sends you an email, and then you decide if you want to reply to it and begin a conversation. There's also a supporting membership, too, if you wanted to give a bit and to help the effort out. Oh, and if you were at the conference, I'm asking that you send me something about the conference that surprised you or that was unexpected. Click the record link in the show notes, or just send me an audio attachment to podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. And that's what Brandon Duke did. He's our UCA video producer and one of the board members.
Hey, Mark, it's Brandon Duke. I woke up the morning after the conference excited and wrote a quick note on Facebook, and you said you might want to put it on the podcast, so here it is. What a conference. I moved to tears, adding up all the acts of loving service I witnessed. The selfless volunteers who worked so hard to make the event happen, the presenters and workshop coordinators who prepared so thoroughly and taught so well, the host church that generously and patiently endured our swarm, the partner organizations that invested their time, money, and goodwill, the friends new and old listening to each other share their heart's deepest hopes and dreams. But the very best part, the thing that has my heart singing this morning, were the total surprises. The people who on their own, with courage and boldness, came to this conference to meet other Unitarians for the very first time. These are the harvest I dared not even hope for, the proof of the power of God's own truth, manifested in the lives of truth seekers, each studying their Bibles, and empowered by the message in a bottle thrown into the sea of internet information by Unitarian ministries. Their hopefulness, their excitement, and the beautiful, undeniable, brute reality of their stories shine like a mountain range in the rising morning sun, standing defiant against the whipping winds of Trinitarian confusion. It compels us forward to execute with boldness and determination those plans, projects, and purposes which have been born this weekend out of the synergy of the talents, vision, and hope of the conference participants. I'm always tempted to reflect on the shortness of time together and the hours of conversation I didn't get to have with too many friends. But this morning, the stark proof of the inertia of the Unitarian movement has me focused on what's next. I want to set my shoulder to the rolling snowball and push harder than ever. What will we each do in the next 12 months? I can't wait to see. Thank you to everyone involved, from a hopeful, inspired, reinvigorated guy. See you next conference.
Thank you, Brandon. I agree. You may know someone for whom stories like this would be fascinating. Maybe you have some other Unitarian Christian friends who don't even know this podcast exists. Please, suggest they check it out. This series should prove to be a delightfully interesting introduction to this podcast. And Mike, I'm very grateful for your openness. I believe your story will help us, especially the us who don't get out much, like me before 3 years ago. Your story will help us understand the complexities and challenges those with a different and difficult upbringing may have to work through. We tend to see things through our own experience and can be quick to condemn. I pray this remarkable journey might help us to be quick to listen instead. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well. Okay, here's a clip from Walter Martin. It's the program on tape called Who Really Wrote the Book of Mormon? It's what Mike's dad would play and then pause and then debate in their home when Mike was young. I just couldn't resist a piece of historical audio from the 1970s.
Smith said he gave everlasting covenants, and they terminated. Smith gave prophecies about what would happen. They didn't come to pass. And Smith and Brigham Young, his follower, proceeded to teach anti-Trinitarian doctrine and to teach that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are three gods, and that there are many gods, and that every Mormon male can make it to godhood himself.